Here we are, the Vander Ende Onderdonk House in Ridgewood, Queens. So first, let me give you a walk through this amazing location, and then at the end of the video, I would like to share some of my other thoughts on the significance of this area and in general, the neighborhood of Ridgewood. A very big shout out to the Greater Ridgewood Historical Society who maintains this property for giving me the opportunity to walk through it and show everything you're about to see. This used to be a Dutch settlement going back to the mid-1600s. However, this home right here goes back to Paulus Vander Ende, who purchased the land in 1709 and built the home. The original farm was 100 acres, and over time, much of the land was sold off. However, inside, there is a really fascinating map which shows the original size of the farm. Right there, you see it highlighted in the brown color. And one thing that should kind of catch your eye is the interesting fact that the farm was very narrow, yet very long. And this was due to the fact that in the Netherlands, in the 1600s, property was taxed based on the width of the land and not the length. So in Netherlands, for instance, you have these very narrow homes which are pretty tall, really designed that way for tax purposes. And the same custom was brought over into this city. But anyway, in 1826, the property was purchased by Adrian and Anne Onderdonk, who expanded the home by adding the wooden section on the side. And the family occupied this home until the early 1900s. But again, the farm at this point, like I mentioned, was much smaller than the original size, as sections of it were already sold off through the years. In 1975, there was a major fire which destroyed many portions of the building, especially the wooden sections. And the city was on the edge of completely knocking down the building. However, a group of local residents came together, established the Greater Ridgewood Historical Society, which ever since takes care of the home, restoring it to much of the original look. Inside, there is, well, there's simply just a lot to look at. So we have 3 floors. So let us begin downstairs in really what is the basement, where you have a great display of household items, along with an oven. It really brings together a nice image of how life was like and what kind of cooking hardware they used for making things like butter or apple cider. On the bottom floor is also where you have an archive with a lot of interesting artifacts and documents. Now let me show you the top floor, where you are hit once again with numerous objects which mostly were donated to the museum by different individuals. But even if you are not interested in history, there is really a lot of very interesting items here. For instance, a great example of furniture with what's called a Hindelopen painting, which is a type of folk art originating in the Netherlands. Usually you see these floral patterns and designs used for decorations and colors like red, green, and blue, as really kind of like primary colors. But when I was doing my doctorate degree, I did one like 30-page research paper about 17th and 18th century Dutch trade. And so I have seen many images like this in books, but to see it in person is something special. I can just imagine a lot of skill and time dedicated in creating furniture like this. We have other items, like the spinning wheel, for example, a device used for spinning thread or yarn, which was central to the production of clothing before the Industrial Revolution and all these factories. It was eventually replaced by the spinning jenny and other advanced machinery, which just really sped up the process, making the price of clothing much cheaper, by the way. There are even few examples of irons. Yes, kids, ironing is something people did for a long time. In fact, in ancient times, we already have examples of that. But this iron, for example, the flat iron, you would put it on, let's say, the top of a stove to heat it up, and then you would iron with it. Hence, household would generally have like maybe 2 or even sometimes 3 of them, because as you are using one of them, the other one is on the stove getting heated. And so you would switch between them and keep on ironing. Or this one coming in on the scene. Here you would lift the top and you would put hot coal, for example, inside, and it will just keep the iron hotter for longer, hence more efficient. And so there is a lot of interesting items. Oh, but the other thing is originally this space was divided into rooms. However, it was left open intentionally so that you can see the roof, which is called the gambrel roof, which has like 2 slopes on each side. So the lower slope is pretty steep, whereas the top slope is much more flat. Many farm buildings have these types of slopes, and you can even observe some homes in New York City with them as well. One benefit to this kind of a roof is that it allows rain and snow to fall off, while extra space is gained upstairs inside of the homes, and that you can observe right here from the inside. And finally, on the main floor, you will see some items which were unearthed on the property, along with other interesting maps and a silver cup awarded to Lambert Wyckoff for 2nd place in an 1842 contest of growing cabbage. Few months back, I made a video about the Wyckoff House in Brooklyn, which is the oldest building in New York City. Well, the Wyckoff family married into the Onderdonk family. In fact, the Wyckoff family owned a few farms in the area of Ridgewood. So if you are interested in that video, I will post the link at the end. We have some places for candles, which would be used before the installation of electricity. And the parlor room, which is decorated with various like mid-1800s items. Parlor rooms were essentially like formal rooms where guests would be entertained and where you would want to place some of your more expensive and rare items to, well, you know, show off. After all, guests are coming. I fear that this might be something that the youngest generation will never experience. But even in my house, I remember growing up, there were these very nice, expensive, special plates reserved only for special occasions and guests. And then there were these everyday plates from IKEA. And God forbid, I took the nice plates to make my breakfast or something like that. I would probably have ended up homeless in about 30 seconds. Same here, you see a lot of the silverware, which would most likely be used for guests. We have also musical instruments like the piano, which would certainly be used for entertainment. And those books in the front that you see are the Bibles from the 1860s. There is also a section dedicated to the local baseball history. For instance, something that I did not even know is that there were 2 fields for baseball in the area where semi-pro teams played, but even teams like the Brooklyn Dodgers on Sundays. And finally, towards the end, now you can shop around in the small museum gift store. Now, there are 2 reasons I am specifically showing you the store. Number 1 is the prices. They are actually very fair. I would even say more than fair. I mean, look at this cute dress for small kids. $10? Now that is a price you will not see in many stores, not to mention a museum gift shop. Or $3 keychains. I mean, I have been to museums where a similar keychain would be sold for like $12. and I would not be surprised by the price. Therefore, I definitely have to give credit for this, as it's really a place which makes it very accessible to the public, including the price of admission, by the way. And so on that level, it is really pretty unique. And the second reason is, well, check out this cash register. Now this is amazing. And I asked, and it is a working cash register. The last interesting item I want to show you is in the back of the house itself on the outside. Originally, the home itself stood at basically the border of Bushwick, which was Dutch, and the new town, which was English. And for years, there has been a dispute over the border line until 1769, so right before the American Revolution, when the official line was drawn. And this rock right here marked where exactly that border was. Hence, this is the arbitration rock. So this here essentially marked the border between Brooklyn and Queens about 250 years ago or so. I mean, come on, that's pretty cool. But here outside, you can also see the extent of the whole property today. So it is fairly narrow, but even today, very long. And originally, like I said, 100 acres, it would just keep going here in the back. That was a lot of land. I mean, 100 acres is what, probably like maybe 75 football fields or something like that. I know a football field is a little bit over an acre. So yeah, to give you a little bit of a perspective, if any of you watch football, American football, think about like putting 75 of those fields together. That's a lot of land. But even today, I'll be honest, for New York City standards, this is a very large property. And we have a garden and also a place to grill and enjoy a meal and just really hang out for the day. So if you are in the area, I really highly recommend it. Very friendly, knowledgeable staff. And so I really believe you're going to enjoy your experience here. The fact that the Greater Ridgewood Historical Society was created and they were able to save and recreate this place, to me, is very significant. And I'll tell you why. There is actually very little places like this remaining. Today, the neighborhood of Ridgewood is in a state of transformation, very similar actually to that of neighborhoods like Greenpoint or Williamsburg in Brooklyn. I'm saying this because I grew up in those neighborhoods. So we are talking about 20 years ago or something like that. So in many respects, Greenpoint was an industrial area where you had former warehouses, still many active factories and big businesses. And then it began to change very quickly. You first had bars, restaurants, and places of entertainment moving in and opening up, which was then very quickly followed by fast, intense growth in new apartments and buildings. Many of the warehouses and factories were actually converted to new apartment buildings. And with that, the prices began to go up pretty quickly. And so many people began to move out of Greenpoint. Many went to places in Long Island and Queens, and especially places like this right here, the neighborhood of Ridgewood. And so when you look at a place like Greenpoint or Williamsburg today, we are talking about a neighborhood which transformed itself from an industrial one to a residential one in a span of about, maybe 25, 30 years? Hence, Ridgewood is on a similar path. Parks are seeing new life, newer buildings are more visible. However, when you walk through other sections of the neighborhood, which are not that far away from the Onderdonk House itself, you clearly see the industrial past of the 20th century, as the area was home to many breweries, distilleries, and glassworks, along with other businesses and factories where many German immigrants were employed. You also begin to notice many of these former warehouses and factories are for sale, and some of them are already transformed into bars and music venues and other forms of entertainment. So it's sort of like the same feel and change that I noticed growing up in Greenpoint. But also, I have to just mention this. Look at this graffiti. Do you know who this is? That's right, this is the Powerpuff Girls, a cartoon I grew up with. I'm not saying I watched it, well, maybe 1 or 2 episodes, but that is my era of cartoons for kids. And for those of you who are even younger than me and don't remember this, guess what? We couldn't fast forward the TV during the commercials or watch these things on YouTube. If there was a commercial, we had to wait for it to be over. So what did you do? Well, naturally, you flip the channels to see what else is on in the meantime. And then you begin watching something else that caught your interest. And you forgot about the original show, so you panic, you flip back just to realize you missed like 8 or 9 minutes, and so you just tuned back in for a minute before another commercial. And so you flip back to that second channel. Guess what? A commercial. How did we survive? I don't know. Those were the days. You know what? I am slowly beginning to sound like a 90-year-old person remembering the Great Depression. I am not going to be surprised. I will be telling my kids that I had to walk to school in 10 feet of snow, just like the teachers were telling us when I was younger. But the point is, you see the neighborhood changing. The city is changing. I don't think it's something bad. It's something that maybe sometimes feels uncomfortable because we develop connections to places. We have memories and it becomes emotional. But nevertheless, we cannot live in the past. We must look forward. But that does not mean we forget about the past. That is also important. So here in Ridgewood, we can see the modern neighborhood which transformed from this industrial past, which that in itself transformed from the original Dutch farms like the one of the Onderdonks. That is why in this changing city, it is important and beautiful that we preserve at least just a little bit of some of the past, like this location does, to show us and remind us of where it all came from and how it changed in our busy life and thoughts and dreams about the future, to also have a time for reflection and a reminder of the past.